and she is an engaged and enthusiastic community leader. She currently serves on the Finance Committee for Statewide Organizing for Community Empowerment, whose mission is to empower Tennesseans to have a greater voice in determining their future, working for social, economic, and environmental justice for all. We also have Seema Singh. Seema is City Councilwoman for Knoxville's 3rd District. She was elected to the Knoxville City Council on November 7th of 2017, born in Varanasi, India, and became a naturalized American citizen. She came to Knoxville and proudly joined the most diverse 5th grade class at West Hills Elementary School. This diversity included the non-whites, Seema from India, a Chinese girl from Elsa, and a white kid from Minnesota. She's been an advocate in the community for over 20 years, working in the field of medical social work, helping with access to healthcare for women, people with HIV/AIDS, and the homeless population. She's taught ballet, sign language, and yoga to children, and she currently runs a jail alternative program for domestic violence offenders. Seema is Knoxville's first Indian American councilwoman and ran her campaign focusing on reducing domestic violence, ensuring jobs with livable wages, and instituting fair economic development. We also have Stanley Johnson. Stanley is the executive director of SEED, the Socially Equal Energy Efficient Development. It is a green community development nonprofit focusing on creating and sustaining jobs for Knoxville's urban young people, as well as ensuring clean energy technologies are available for low-income residents. SEED is preparing the heart of Knoxville to become the center of our emerging green economy by increasing access to sustainable clean energy technologies and a sustainable food supply for low to moderate income residents. The resulting green job opportunities associated with these programs create pathways out of poverty for our youth. And SEED's mission is to create pathways for young adults through career readiness training while equipping communities with environmental literacy skills. SEED's vision is to reduce energy costs, increase affordable housing, and create sustainable employment for local communities for a sustainable city and sustainable careers for all of Knoxville's employees. We'll also have Cliff Cockerham. He has a long history of activism dating back to the 1970s. Much of his current work nationally and internationally involves speaking and teaching about climate justice and intersectionality. His work includes monitoring the POTUS administrative impacts on EPA's clean air, water, and energy protection. As president of the Tennessee chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility, which shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985, he partners with an array of organizations on a Connect the Dots campaign to link various environmental issues to the underlying existential problem of climate change. Cliff is also a speaker with BP Gore's Climate Reality Leadership Corps. And within Tennessee, he sits on the board of directors for the Tennessee Clean Water Network and the Tennessee leadership team of Senate's Climate Lobby, the Elders Action Team, and the Global Catholic Climate Network, while representing Tennessee and America's State Carbon Pricing Network. Cliff's work seeks to expand environmental activism beyond America's metro hubs. So thank you everyone for being here. We have an amazing panel and I'm so excited to get started with you all. So let's start with Drocella. Drocella, can you speak to make sure we can hear you? I don't think Drocella can unmute. Drocella, are you able to speak?
Yes, I think now I can speak.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with this question. How do you believe we can create climate mitigation plans that address the intersection between climate change, poverty, and homelessness?
If we don't take care of environment, the environment will not take care of us either. The social capital, in other words, people, are at the center of sustainable development, a development that is economically viable, ecologically, rational, and socially acceptable. In order to create consolidated climate change mitigation plans, we have to meet basic needs for everyone, including low-income families, homeless people, refugees and immigrants. Access to environment-friendly technology and supplies has a cost. In French, there is a say, invente la fame n'a point d'oreille, meaning words are wasted on a starving man or a starving woman. It is hard to talk about climate change among people who cannot have healthy food on their kitchen table, people who do not have shelter and clean water, nor money to pay their monthly bills as well as the student loans. It is even harder to share those plans with immigrants and refugees who do not feel welcomed and respected as productive and contributing members of our communities. It is true, everything falls on leadership. We need leaders who are committed to poverty and hunger eradication. We need leaders who are committed to creation of a conducive environment to equitable wealth creation in our communities. We need leaders who are committed to end homelessness and invest massively in affordable housing. We need leaders to keep our country open to refugees and immigrants, value, embrace their contributions, and have good plans for their integration. We need leaders who stand for human rights, leaders who detach themselves from those that violate human rights, and leaders who respect multilateral treaties America committed to. We need leaders who support research and development because we need solid adaptation and mitigation measures to climate change. We need open-minded leaders who value the power of collaboration and cooperation at different levels, local, regional, national, and global. I'm glad that we have a climate change council in the Knoxville city, and I will do everything I can as an engaged citizen to help that to become a reality. And I'm proud to be an American. I have two grandsons. Julian Davis and Elliot Joel are respectively 18 months and 8 months. One of the first words I will teach them are love, people, and environment. So I think that leadership matters in what all do we do, and we have to include every people, but we have to resolve basic needs if we are working towards sustainable development for all.
Thank you so much for that insight, Drocella. Stanley, I would like to pose this next question to you. How do we move beyond so many theoretical and academic conversations about equity to true community power? And what role would policy play in really creating societal change? And adding on to that, how can we better engage youth in these efforts?
Okay, I'm back in the meeting, but I don't hear anybody speaking.
Am I on yet?
Yeah, you're on.
Okay. Could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. So how do we move beyond so many theoretical and academic conversations about equity to true community power? What role would policy play in creating real societal change? And as we do that, how do we better engage our youth?
Well, we have to first start with, do we really want to change, right? Drocella just talked about our leaders, that some of them don't even believe that climate is an issue, right? Some of them don't even believe racism is an issue. So when you're really at that stage of high level of not even believing it, it's hard to really interact. So to me, what I look at is the youth, right? And I look at we've messed it up. So here you go, right? We're gonna have to give you this problem and you're gonna have to solve it. Congratulations. So we here at SEED want to start out by actually start the policy of just language, right? We have a climate situation that we don't talk to Pookie and Ray Ray and Leroy them, right? We don't talk to Ashley and Bubba out there in the sticks. So what we have is an area of the hood and the holler that are not being touched by the issues. And if we're not being really translucent or just being able to be clear to let these young people know that this is a real issue that they're gonna have to deal with. And if we don't really start talking to those young people about why are you going to school, for instance, right? Everybody says, well, go to school, get a good job. Well, why don't we teach kids about money in school? Why aren't we teaching, go to school and become a great change agent? Well, why aren't we teaching young people about the civics? How does the government work? One of the things I realized 16 to 28-year-olds really don't comprehend how the structure of the government is set up. We have more people voting for American Idol than we do voting for the President of the United States, more than voting for the mayor of your city, more than voting for the city council people. I'm glad Seema's on here as well, because one of the things I talk about is I'm an immigrant as well. I was born in Black River, Jamaica. My parents were migrant workers. We picked fruit up and down the East Coast. And what we don't talk about in this country a lot is class, right? So we deal with a lot of race and we deal with a lot of issues, but we don't really talk about class in a way of how class deals with race as well. In Jamaica, we're all Black. So we don't have that racism issue, but we do have a class issue. And America is the only place where you can actually transition out of one class to a next. If you were born a garbage man's kid in Jamaica, you're probably gonna die that same way, at least in people's mindset. So here we talk about education, but we also have to talk about experience, right? So we have to make sure that these young people get the experience that they're gonna need to actually be fulfilled in this process. Taking them to city council meetings, let them understand the process. Taking them to Wall Street to see how the Dow Jones actually work. We have to really start broadening these young people's mind in a way where it's not all, oh, you're poverty, you're poor, you're this, you're that, and it's all of this stuff that's negative all the time. Well, I grew up in the projects. They told me kids in the projects don't graduate high school. Well, that's a lie, right? I don't only graduated high school, I graduated college and went on to the great University of Tennessee and got even a postgraduate degree. So the point to that is we can do it together. We can't do it apart, and we have to stop politicizing stuff that's real, right? This is a real issue. Last year, we did not have all these fires in California, right? But now it's not only just California, it's spread even more west, right? It's all the way in Colorado now with all these forest fires. And in East Tennessee, we had forest fires in the mountains, right? Which never happens. So climate is definitely changing. We're about to have 2 storms in the Gulf, right? So we can either put this up and say, oh, Mother Nature's just doing it, and it's just a way that stuff goes around, or we can start actually looking at what the scientists say and say, every time you think about climate change, think about poverty, because the people that are impoverished get affected the most. And then when we go back and talk about equity, we really have to be careful with this equity thing, because what we're really going to be talking about at some point is getting real serious about reparations, right? I'll give you a for instance. We know that African Americans have the highest population of health problems, right? We have the lowest education rate. We have the lowest economic rate. All these things these are known facts. In Knoxville, we have a 42% African American poverty rate, right? It's #1 in the 7 states that touch Tennessee. Those things are real. So if you're going to say, let's use COVID for example, right? If you're going to sit up here and say, well, we got a COVID crisis, well, guess who's going to die first? The people that have no health care, the people that don't ever go to the doctor, the people that always have the same issues that before they said the underlying issues, right? Why wouldn't you test those communities first or the most? So if we're going to talk about equity, these are the kind of things I'm talking about. We already know these things. So we know if it's equitable, it should be almost doubling the effort that you do in those communities, right? So if that's the case, we have to start thinking about that economically too, educationally as well. So that means those underserved people are going to have to get more of the government funding, more of the people understanding, more just to even consider them to be equitable. So we got to be, if we about it, we need to be about it. And if we're going to stop talking, it's really going to come down to, hey man, we did you guys such an injustice, including Redline. We're going to actually let you borrow some money now. We're going to actually teach you about how to borrow money to pay it back so you can actually build generational wealth. Like, we're going to have to be able to say, hey, we were wronged. So that's all.
Wow, thank you so much, Stan. And touching on the issue of funding, I'd like to transition to you, Seema, and ask what advice you might give to wealthier climate advocates that are trying to better support under-resourced communities. And even adding to that, how do you see spirituality and our shared love of nature really supporting us all as we do such big and difficult work?
I'm really coming from a different place than when Drocella was talking about policy. That's something that's very, very important. And the leaders stepping up to say what's right and then to do the right actions. And then also community. But I guess I'm bringing it down to the individual level of spirituality. One of the things with policy and community right now, people don't want to wear their masks because it offends their religious sensibility or their individuality. So that's where I'm saying we have to get back down to the individual as well. For myself, I've been trying to understand why I went to city council with an issue with KUB because they are charging people a basic rate just to have the service and then a very small charge for what you actually use. My usage was about $20. My fees were about $80. And no one understood why mine were $20, but that's because it was fall, the weather was good. But I also realized I'm very careful with water. I hang my stuff outside to dry, not out of cheapness, not out of just thinking that everything is about I have to conserve all the time. It has to do with a certain spirituality and a connection that I think comes from being raised Hindu. I know in India, there's a big difference between when someone says namaste to you. What they're actually saying is that I see the God in you and say, respect that light. In Hinduism, we can see the God in everything. The earth itself, very much like the Gaia principle in Wiccan philosophies, the very earth itself is sacred. There's no separation between me and the earth and God. So it's not a creation that we are in charge of. It's how we treat ourselves. So I've seen, you see the Ganga River and you see so much pollution in there and wonder how can there be this strong philosophy, yet this reality. that's one of the things that the population and then what poorer nations have been given to work with. You know, when we talk about litter, should we be getting angry with the people who littered or the people who actually made the packaging? Sort of the same thing with a lot of poor countries. The wealthier countries have used and spent and sort of shifted to where the poorer countries look like we're doing the most damage now. So back to the religion part. So when you see the earth is sacred and you're using water, and if you slow down and see what you're doing and you feel that connection, you use it very differently. I do that only when I'm feeling very spiritual. No, it's something that's difficult to do. You have to really focus on that. But to do it in daily life, I think that wealthier nations can do something like that by just having an appreciation for these resources. When you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and have to collect all the water that you're going to need for the rest of the day, you're going to look at it differently. You're going to experience it differently. And the way that these resources have been, really used up, and third world nations or the developing nations are just trying to get by with what we have, and that's causing a lot more destruction and pollution. In that same way, we need these philosophies, just like the people wearing masks or not wearing masks. This is the level where I can't science somebody into understanding that water is precious. I can't yell at somebody into it, but if I can sit down with them and hopefully experience it in the same way. My big issue that I work with is domestic violence. And I was really saddened to hear, anytime people start suffering, whenever there's a shortage in resources, it's always the poor, the people of color, and always, always, always the women. Violence goes up, young children marriages go up. And this is something that's already being seen in a lot of the spaces where the resources are being fought over. I'm trying to end this on a good note. And there is. I know that when I was looking online about what went on with the 1918 flu and the realization that just sunshine made the difference, and they took the cots outside. To me, that was hearing something it was very spiritual, just that basic sun. And at times, I think we need to take it to this level. But I'm still working on policy, promise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Seema. And transitioning to you, Cliff, with your work being so focused on health and justice, and in light of COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement, could you speak to how you see climate advocacy being affected and the progress you've noted thus far?
Sure. Could you tell me at this point how many minutes you'd like me to speak? Because I can adjust according to what time is left.
Sure. If you could do about 4 minutes so that they'll have 10 for questions, that'd be great. Well, 9 for questions.
Got it. 4 minutes. Okay. Acting on climate in diverse communities by creating jobs and including communities of color and opportunities for carbon reduction. And what I'd like to do is, in that context, address the intersection of climate action, COVID-19, systematic discrimination, which I'm going to refer to in brief as the Black Lives Matter movement, especially George Floyd coming to the fore. On the one hand, my answer to the question of what's changed, absolutely nothing. The second part of my answer is, in light of COVID and systematic discrimination and George Floyd, absolutely everything has changed. What I mean by that is the points on the screen 3, 4, and 5. COVID-19 is a facet of climate change. More pandemics will follow. The multiplier effect of climate change increases the unmanageability of something like a pandemic. The causes of climate change, fossil fuel, make us more vulnerable to COVID-19. People actually, when exposed to the same pollution that makes them sick with asthma and respiratory and cardiovascular disease, is the same pollution process of the burning of fossil fuels that drives climate change and will eventually potentially do us all in, and life as we know it on this planet. And finally, the exact exposure to particulate matter that comes with the burning of fossil fuels literally goes into our lungs and makes it easier for COVID-19 to take out people, which is why, in great factor, certainly people of color, people who have experienced discrimination historically for hundreds of years, people who experience racism right now, those people have a historic burden of disease. But more than that, people of color, low-income people, are often in the jobs which make them with the highest exposure, because they have jobs which we identify as essential work. It's low paid and high exposure. But on top of that, they're often living in communities and working in communities where they're exposed to the particulate matter from the burning of fossil fuels that on top of it makes them more susceptible. The causes of climate change, fossil fuel, make us more vulnerable. And we have only just begun to see now this problem more clearly, this intersection between climate change, health getting worse as climate change unfolds. We can see it happening right now. Climate change and its cause, which makes us sick, and climate change and its cause, long and short term, which simply isn't distributed to. These are diseases and effects which are not distributed equally due to chance, but fall disproportionately because of racism. Poverty is a factor in that, but frankly, racism is probably the bigger factor. And we've just only begun to see, as climate change rolls out and as our burning of fossil fuels becomes worse and puts more toxins into the environment, that one, make us generally sick, and two, make us more vulnerable to what's happening with climate change unfolding, like an opportunistic zoonotic infectious disease, which is what COVID-19 does. It spreads because there's an opportunity, and climate change creates opportunities. That's my 4-minute mark. So let me just close with saying, we can now, what's changed is we can now better see, because of COVID-19 and the simultaneous rise of the George Floyd Black Lives Movement, that there's a key element of race, racism, poverty, political marginalization that make it worse and make it unjust. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cliff. And Marion, do we have any questions in the chat?
Me there. Yes, we have a few questions in chat. The first one is aimed at Stanley, and it is, what can local governments be doing to help out? We talk often about what statewide and national governments can do. What can local governments do? Beyond creating parks and cleanup projects, what can local governments do to increase climate equity?
Well, the biggest thing that we've done here in Knoxville, we've created a climate council, right? And it's focused around equity. So the local government can actually start forming teams of people that have experts that can actually do some of the work that they don't have to do, and they don't have the expertise to actually do it. They just need to have the platform, right? So government, we assume, solves issues. Where I come from, like I just told you, I was from Black River, Jamaica, our government kind of doesn't exist. So like when a hurricane comes through, the people actually go out and help Ms. Jones across the street pick up her roof and put it back on, right? So the government can lay a platform. And the other big thing is bring funding to this issue, right? So what we're dealing with in poor communities is not just a lack of funding, but connections and networks. I've watched our mayor here actually help raise $5 million by just saying that this is a good thing for us to do as a community. So those are the kind of things that we need to make sure are happening. And local government has to be at least on the same side as you, and saying, we don't know how to fix these issues, but we know how to put a platform together, and we should be able to be the convener of these issues so we can actually have a conversation. I'll give you one more instance. We had a weatherization that was a big deal back in 2009, and we didn't know how to solve it. We had houses that were about almost 80 to 100 years old in stock, and the poorest people lived in those homes, and we were talking about high utility bills and record cutoffs and all that kind of stuff. Well, we got together and did what we call a Smarter Cities Stakeholder Committee and found out who were all the stakeholders. So we got TVA and our local utility boards and the city and the University of Tennessee and local people and nonprofits. And we started talking about how we actually do that. We end up getting $15 million to do some work, and we end up doing 1,300 homes. And we called it Knoxville Extreme Energy Makeover. So we can do the work together. We just have to make sure that the government understands their place. They don't have to solve everything. They just need to be the backbone and the convener of the process so the people can actually do the work, because we are the people.
Okay.
Can I add something? May I?
Sure.
I agree with everything Stan said. I also want to add, though, there's an important role of the federal government, but we don't have that kind of support right now from the White House. It's important to recognize there's a great deal that we can do here in local communities and states. I just gave 3 talks to the Hispanic community in Orlando about organizing to press, to form coalitions with other persons of color, and to press for a declaration of climate emergency in the city of Orlando. They're doing that in Tallahassee and Miami. That has an impact, not only concrete impact, but it also filters up to Washington and lets legislators on both sides of the aisle know that there's something happening with their voter constituency, and they need to get with the program. We do need the federal government. We don't need them. We don't need to wait for them, but we do need to act. And some of the action we can take is very concrete, very specific, and helps, like cutting back on meat, cutting back on air travel, changing the way we design cities in terms of space and walking and bicycles and mass transportation and the organization of space. But we can also send signals by how we pass legislation that says this is a climate emergency that requires mobilization. And when cities and counties do that, eventually states and the federal government can do it, and we can increase the support we get. We don't need to wait for them, but we do need them eventually, and that sort of thing helps. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, Seema, you may indeed respond to that, but let me throw out one of the other questions as well, and you can grab the whole jar. Chris says, one question that occurs to me is the issue of green jobs actually going to people of color. Our older daughter was working in solar power, and she told us that relatively few of those jobs are currently held by persons of color. Should there be training programs that target communities of color? And then another kind of related question is, we try to be fair to people. The issue of fairness versus effectiveness. Climate solutions must be fair. They must address the needs of the communities of color who've been marginalized, but they must also be effective, because if carbon emissions do not drop steeply, then communities of color will sustain levels of damage that make today's levels look trivial. So how do we get to fairness and results at the same time? Or whatever, Seema, if the host will unmute you, then we're happy to have you respond.
There we go. Yes, we should be training people of color to do all sorts of things in the green movement. It's it's something that I think will also higher prioritize if people are working in it. And there are a lot of jobs in that field that we just have not utilized because we haven't felt that that's where, we're still using fossil fuels. As far as the policies with the local cities, what I think the most important thing that Knoxville is doing is showing that there's an Office of Sustainability. If a local government has that office, it says a whole lot. You can change how the city, how the city lives and works with each other by zoning, density, transportation. There are all kinds of different issues. The codes that you put for buildings are a huge energy burden. So there's a lot, but I think like with what Stan's saying, the government can't do it by itself. Having people come in together from all places in the community is really what's going to make the difference.
Okay, thank you.
If I can add something
Please
very
do.
quick. I think we have to build strong communities where everybody counts. So, and we can do it. We are glad that we have neighborhood associations, we have a neighborhood office. So we have to sit as community members and define those problems we have locally. If every locality has a plan on priorities, and then we'll go to policymakers and people who have funding to tackle the real needs according to the community needs. But we need to be strong together, because if I don't see Seema, I don't see Stan, I don't see Priscilla as somebody who is impacted by the climate change, no matter where you are from, no matter where you live, no matter what your background, education, it will be a cycle. You talked about change. Now we need what we call radical change, and that can only happen by having strong, cohesive communities.
All right, thank you. So,
Thank you.
so your answers have addressed several of the questions, including some ones that I didn't read. Have we one more minute for one more remark from everybody? Princella or Don?
Seems we are out of time,
Okay.
but thank you all for this wonderful discussion. We do have a short break before the next session on this track, which would be creation care, faith-based perspective.